The sound of breaking glass echoed through the mansion, followed by a cry that made everyone freeze. It was the kind of silence that made the air feel heavy. Upstairs, 8-year-old Noah Parker stood beside a broken vase, his hands shaking, his eyes wide in shock. The 5 elegant women who had arrived that morning stood in a half circle, staring at him. Their heels clicked softly on the marble floor as they moved closer. One of them, Vanessa Brooks, let out a soft laugh, the kind that was not kind at all. "That vase," she said, tilting her head, "cost more than your maid makes in a year." Noah's lips trembled. He wanted to speak, to say it was an accident, but before he could, he heard footsteps on the stairs. The tall figure of his father, Ethan Parker, appeared at the top landing, his face calm yet unreadable. "What's going on here?" he asked quietly. Grace Miller rushed in from the hallway, her cleaning cloth still in her hand. Her eyes moved straight to Noah. "Are you hurt, sweetheart?" she whispered, kneeling beside him. She didn't even look at the broken vase, only at the boy's trembling fingers. Vanessa folded her arms. "Maybe you should teach your help to stay out of places she doesn't belong," she said. Ethan's eyes went from Vanessa to Grace, then to his son. "That's enough," he said softly. "Noah, go to your room." Noah looked up at Grace helplessly. She smiled weakly and nodded. "It's okay. Go on." The boy walked away slowly, his small feet echoing in the wide hallway. When he was gone, Ethan sighed and turned to the women. "I'm sure we can all be careful from now on," he said politely, though his voice carried an edge that made them go silent. He turned to Grace next. "You may clean this up." Grace nodded quickly. "Yes, sir." She knelt and began to gather the sharp pieces. Her hands shook slightly, not from fear of the glass, but from the eyes staring down at her. She could feel their judgment like a shadow pressing on her back. When the women finally left, whispering among themselves, Ethan stood watching quietly. "You don't have to rush," he said. Grace didn't look up. "It's fine, sir," she murmured. "I'll finish it quickly." Ethan hesitated, then walked away. His face softened for a moment, but he said nothing more. That morning had begun with luxury cars pulling into the gate one after another. 5 women had stepped out in designer dresses, their perfumes blending with the smell of fresh roses by the entrance. They had come for one reason: to spend 30 days in Ethan Parker's mansion, each hoping to be chosen as his new wife. Grace had been polishing the crystal dining table when she saw them arrive. She wiped the same spot over and over again, not because it was dirty, but because she couldn't believe what she was seeing. She had worked there for 4 months, long enough to know the house always felt empty, even with all its gold and glass. Ethan's wife had died 8 months ago, and since then, laughter had vanished from the halls. The mansion was big, but it was Noah's quiet footsteps that always broke the silence. Grace had grown close to him, closer than she ever meant to. She helped him with his homework, cooked small meals he actually ate, and told him bedtime stories about hope and kindness. He called her Miss Grace, and though she smiled when he said it, she always reminded herself she was just the maid. When the 5 women arrived, Grace already felt something heavy in her chest. They were all beautiful and confident, walking like they owned the world. Each of them looked around the mansion as if they were already moving in. But when their eyes met hers, they didn't see a person, only a servant. Vanessa, the former model, was the first to speak. "So you're the famous Miss Grace," she said with a sweet smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Noah talks about you a lot." Grace lowered her head politely. "He's a good boy, ma'am." Lydia, the lawyer, chuckled. "Well, let's hope he learns to talk about someone else soon." The others laughed quietly. Grace only smiled. "I'll prepare the guest rooms," she said softly, walking away before they could say more. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the city skyline, Ethan sat in his study with a photo of his late wife in his hands. He had promised her before she passed that he would take care of Noah. But lately, Noah had been distant, his laughter fading like the echo of an old song. Ethan thought maybe bringing in these women would fill the emptiness, give his son a mother again, and perhaps heal his own heart too. Still, he couldn't shake the image of Grace kneeling on the floor earlier, cleaning broken glass, while others stood and judged. Something about the way she comforted Noah, so gently, stayed in his mind. Downstairs, Grace finished her chores. Her small room behind the kitchen was quiet, with only a small lamp lighting the space. She sat on the edge of her bed, holding a folded paper Noah had given her, a little craft heart with messy handwriting that said, "Thank you for helping me smile again." Tears filled her eyes. She placed it carefully in her drawer, whispering, "Don't worry, little one, you'll always have someone who cares." But outside her door, faint voices whispered in the hallway. "She thinks she's special," Vanessa's voice sneered. "The maid needs to remember her place." "Let's make sure she does," Lydia replied. Their heels clicked away. Grace sat still, her hand frozen on the drawer. The house that once felt safe suddenly felt dangerous. She didn't know that upstairs, Noah was awake, listening too. His small fists clenched under his blanket as he whispered, "I won't let them hurt you, Miss Grace." That night, the mansion slept under the cold Chicago moon, but inside its walls, quiet storms had already begun. The 5 women dreamed of money and marriage. Ethan dreamed of peace he couldn't find. And Grace, with her heart trembling, prayed that tomorrow would not bring more pain. In the distance, thunder rolled across the sky, echoing softly through the grand halls, as if warning that love and truth were about to be tested. Morning sunlight spilled through the tall windows of the Parker mansion, but it did little to warm the house. The grand living room felt colder than ever. Grace had been awake since 5, polishing the marble floors and setting the breakfast table before anyone came down. She moved quietly, her soft slippers barely making a sound. In the kitchen, she stirred a pot of oatmeal for Noah. The boy liked his breakfast simple, just a little honey and milk. As she poured it into a small bowl, she heard giggling from the hallway. The 5 women entered one by one, dressed as if they were going to a photo shoot, not breakfast. Vanessa sat first, tossing her hair over her shoulder. "Do you always make such plain food?" she asked, eyeing the oatmeal. Grace smiled gently. "It's for Noah, ma'am. He doesn't like heavy meals early in the morning." Amber laughed lightly. "Well, I hope Ethan doesn't eat like that, or we'll all starve." Their laughter echoed through the kitchen, but Grace stayed calm. She served the coffee, placed plates, and stepped back quietly. Her heart hurt, not because of their words, but because Noah was upstairs listening to everything. A few minutes later, small footsteps came down the stairs. Noah appeared, still rubbing his sleepy eyes. "Good morning," he said softly. "Good morning, sweetheart," Grace replied with a smile. "Come sit, breakfast is ready." Vanessa leaned closer to the boy. "Good morning, Noah," she said in a sweet voice. "You remember my name, right? Vanessa." Noah nodded shyly. "Yes, ma'am." "Good," she said, smiling wider. "Maybe later you can tell your dad which one of us you like best." Grace looked up sharply, surprised she would say that in front of him. "He's just a child, ma'am," she said quietly. Vanessa's smile faded. "And you are just the maid," she said coldly. "Know your place." The room went silent. Noah pushed his bowl away, his appetite gone. Grace lowered her head and said nothing. She could feel her throat tighten, but she refused to let them see her cry. Just then, Ethan walked in, wearing his dark suit, holding his phone. "Good morning," he said, looking around. He saw the tension in the room but didn't ask. "Noah, eat up, son. You have school in an hour." Noah nodded quietly. Ethan glanced at Grace, their eyes meeting for a brief second. There was concern in his look, but he didn't say a word. Later that day, while the women toured the mansion's art gallery with Ethan, Grace cleaned Noah's room. The boy was sitting on the floor building a small paper house. "Do you like any of them?" she asked softly. Noah shook his head. "They're mean," he said. "They act nice to Dad, but when he's not there, they're different." Grace sighed. "Sometimes people pretend to be kind, but the truth always shows, one way or another." Noah looked up at her. "I wish you could be my mom." The words made her heart stop. She smiled sadly, brushing his hair gently. "That's sweet, Noah, but your dad will choose someone special for both of you." "You're already special," he whispered. Grace turned away, pretending to fix the bed, her eyes wet with quiet tears. She didn't want him to see. As the days passed, the women grew restless. They realized Ethan's attention often drifted toward his son, and his son's joy seemed to come only when Grace was around. That made them furious. Charlotte was the first to act. One morning she spilled wine on the living room rug, then called for Grace. "You missed a spot," she said, pointing at nothing. "Are you even trained for this job?" Grace knelt silently, cleaning what was already spotless. Lydia watched from the staircase, smirking. "Maybe she's better at pretending to be kind than doing her job." Vanessa crossed her arms. "I think she's using the boy to make us look bad." The words made Grace pause. "That's not true," she said quietly. "Oh, isn't it?" Amber replied. "You always show up right when Ethan's around, acting gentle, like some saint." Grace shook her head. "I only do what I'm paid to do, ma'am." Charlotte leaned closer. "Well, maybe you should remember who pays you." They laughed and walked away, leaving her alone on the floor with the smell of spilled wine. Grace stayed there for a long time, her knees pressed against the rug, her hands trembling. Later, she heard Noah's voice calling her. "Miss Grace, come outside, please." She wiped her face quickly and went out to the garden. Noah stood beside a small patch of flowers, holding something behind his back. "I made this for you," he said, handing her a paper crown. "Because you're the nicest person in this house." Grace knelt and hugged him tightly. "Thank you, Noah, but you shouldn't make people angry because of me." He looked up, serious. "They're already angry, but I'm not scared." Grace smiled faintly. "You're brave." From the upstairs balcony, Lydia watched them with narrowed eyes. "You see that?" she whispered to Vanessa. "He's getting too close to her. We need to fix that before Ethan notices." That night, Ethan sat in his office watching the security monitor. The house looked peaceful, but something in his heart felt off. He had started noticing the looks the women gave Grace, the little smirks when she walked by, the sudden quiet when she entered a room. He remembered the first day Grace came to work, shy but polite, carrying a small bag and a resume full of kind words from her previous employers. She had no college degree, no fancy background, but there was something real about her. He rubbed his eyes tiredly. "Maybe I'm imagining things," he whispered. But he wasn't. Downstairs, Grace finished folding the laundry. She placed Noah's clean shirts neatly in his drawer. Suddenly, she heard soft whispers outside her door again. "She won't last long," Vanessa's voice said. "Tomorrow, we'll make sure Ethan sees her for who she really is." "How?" Lydia asked. "Leave that to me," Vanessa replied with a cruel laugh. Grace froze. She waited until the sound of their heels faded, then sat down on the edge of her bed. Her hands clutched her cross necklace tightly. "God, please, give me strength," she whispered. "I can't lose this job. Noah needs someone who cares for him." At that same moment, in his own room, Noah sat by the window holding his paper crown. He looked down at the garden where he and Grace had played that afternoon. He whispered to himself, "I'll protect her, no matter what." The mansion lights dimmed one by one, and the night swallowed the house in silence. But inside those walls, hidden plans were being made. Lies were waiting to be told. Grace didn't know that by the next morning, her life in the Parker mansion would begin to fall apart, one whisper at a time. The next morning came with gray clouds hanging low over the city. Grace stood in the kitchen early as usual, preparing breakfast. She tried to focus on her work, but her mind was heavy. Every whisper she heard last night kept replaying in her head. When she carried a tray of tea to the dining room, she noticed something strange. The silver vase on the side table was gone. It had been there yesterday, right beside the photo of Ethan's late wife. She frowned slightly, thinking maybe someone had moved it for cleaning. By 7, the 5 women gathered at the table, dressed perfectly as always. Vanessa sat at the head chair beside Ethan, her smile wide and bright. "Ethan," she began sweetly, "I think there's something you should know." Ethan looked up from his coffee. "What is it?" Vanessa sighed, pretending to hesitate. "I don't want to cause trouble, but we found out something disturbing about your maid." Grace froze behind the door, still holding the tray. Lydia leaned forward. "Yes, one of our friends in the city knows her. She was fired from her last job for stealing jewelry." Grace's hand trembled, the cups rattled quietly. Ethan frowned. "That doesn't sound like her." Amber added quickly, "We even saw her near your study last night. She said she was cleaning, but it looked suspicious." Charlotte nodded. "Maybe you should check your things, just in case." Ethan's expression turned serious. "Enough," he said. "I'll look into it myself." The women exchanged secret smiles, satisfied. Grace stepped back quietly before anyone noticed she was listening. She returned to the kitchen, her heart racing, her throat tight. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she forced herself to keep working. When Noah came in minutes later, she smiled faintly. "Morning, sweetheart," she said softly. He noticed her red eyes. "What happened, Miss Grace?" "Nothing," she whispered, touching his cheek. "Eat your breakfast, okay?" But Noah was not fooled. He looked toward the dining room and saw the 5 women laughing with his father. He clenched his little fists. "They said something bad about you, didn't they?" Grace shook her head. "Don't worry about that. Everything will be fine." Noah's jaw tightened. "I'll tell Dad the truth if they lie again." She smiled sadly. "Sometimes truth takes time to be seen. Let's be patient." That afternoon, Ethan sat in his office, staring at his laptop. Something didn't feel right. He remembered all the times Grace helped Noah, how gentle she was, how she never complained, even when treated badly. Could those same hands steal? It didn't make sense. He called her previous employer's number, listed on her file. "Hello," he said. "This is Ethan Parker. Grace Miller used to work for you?" A warm voice replied, "Yes, she did. She was the best we ever had." "Why?" "Someone told me she was fired for stealing." The woman gasped. "That's nonsense. Grace left because she moved to the city. She was honest, hard-working, and kind." Ethan leaned back in his chair, his doubts turned into quiet anger. Someone was lying, and he intended to find out who. He stood up and went to the control room near the basement, where the mansion's security footage was stored. The guard looked surprised when Ethan said, "I'll review the tapes from last night." For the next hour, Ethan sat watching the recordings. At first, he saw nothing unusual. Then, at midnight, he saw Vanessa and Lydia sneaking into the study, whispering and laughing. They placed a small bag inside one of the drawers. Ethan's eyes narrowed. He pressed pause and leaned closer to the screen. "Unbelievable," he muttered. He checked another camera. There they were again, walking back upstairs as if nothing happened. Ethan rubbed his chin. "So this is your game." He decided not to confront them yet. He wanted to know how far they would go. That evening, Grace was polishing the staircase railing when Ethan approached quietly. "Grace," he said gently. She turned quickly. "Yes, sir." "I heard some accusations this morning," he said, watching her face. "I need to ask you something honestly. Did you ever take anything that wasn't yours?" Grace's eyes widened. "No, sir, never." Her voice trembled, but she didn't look away. Ethan studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, I believe you." Her eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, sir. But," he added quietly, "I need you to be strong. Things might get worse before they get better." She nodded, though fear twisted in her chest. "I understand." Later that night, the women gathered in Charlotte's room. "He's starting to doubt us," Lydia said, pacing. "We need proof." Vanessa smirked. "Then we'll give him proof." She pulled out her phone. "I know someone who can forge records. We'll create fake documents saying she was arrested for theft. Once Ethan sees that, she's finished." Amber grinned. "Perfect." Noah, who had been walking down the hall quietly with his teddy bear, stopped when he heard their voices. He pressed his ear to the door. Vanessa continued, "We'll make sure she's gone before the party. Then one of us can finally be his choice." Noah's eyes filled with tears. He ran back to his room, closed the door, and sat on his bed. He whispered to himself, "I have to tell Dad." But a moment later, fear crept in. What if they lied about him too? What if Grace got hurt because of him? He hugged his bear tightly and made a promise. "I'll find another way." 2 days later, the rumor spread fast. Someone leaked a photo online of fake police papers, claiming Grace had a criminal record. Neighbors whispered at the gate. Even the grocery delivery man looked at her differently. Grace cried quietly that night, alone in her small room. She wanted to leave, but she remembered Ethan's words. "Be strong." Upstairs, Ethan read the fake report on his phone. He sighed heavily, then opened his drawer, pulling out the real footage from the cameras. "It's time they see the truth," he said softly. He called his friend from the city newspaper. "I want to host a charity event this weekend," he said. "Invite the press." "Of course," the friend replied. "What's the occasion?" "You'll see," Ethan said, looking toward the hallway where Grace's light still glowed faintly under her door. "It's time to end this lie once and for all." That night, Grace sat by her window, watching the rain fall. She whispered a quiet prayer, not for herself, but for Noah. "Please, keep him safe," she said softly. Down the hall, Ethan stood by his study window, the same rain reflecting on his face. His heart was heavy, but for the first time, his mind was clear. He knew who the real thief was, and by the weekend, everyone else would know too. Outside, thunder rumbled again, louder this time, as if the storm itself was waiting for the truth to break free. Saturday came bright and clear, but inside the Parker mansion, tension filled every corner. The ballroom was being prepared for the grand event. Large chandeliers glimmered above, cameras were being set up, and guests began arriving in glittering gowns and black suits. Grace stood quietly at the far end of the hall, helping with the decorations. She wore her plain Maid uniform, her hair tied neatly. She didn't understand why Ethan had asked her to stay for the event after everything that happened. She still felt the sting of the cruel whispers, the fake reports, the judgmental eyes. From the grand staircase, Vanessa and the other 4 women descended together, smiling like queens ready to claim a crown. They posed for the photographers, laughing softly as they whispered to each other. "Tonight she's finished," Vanessa murmured. "After this, no one will even remember her name." Grace heard the words, but stayed calm. She had promised Ethan she wouldn't quit, even though her heart felt broken. Ethan stood near the piano, talking with a few guests. His face was calm, his posture steady, but his mind was on the plan he had set in motion. Every second felt heavy. He looked across the room and saw Grace adjusting the flower vases near the stage. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and she saw something in his look that gave her hope. Noah ran up to her and hugged her leg tightly. "Miss Grace," he whispered, "Dad said you have to stay until the end, okay?" Grace smiled faintly. "I'll stay, sweetheart." The boy looked serious. "Everything will be okay soon, I promise." Before she could reply, a voice from the stage called out, "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Ethan Parker." Applause filled the hall. Ethan stepped forward with a microphone in hand. His voice was calm, but his eyes carried quiet fire. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "Tonight, we gather to celebrate not just the future of my family, but also to reveal something important." The 5 women straightened their backs proudly, assuming it was the moment he would announce one of them. Cameras pointed toward them. Ethan continued, "For the past month, I've opened my home to 5 remarkable women, each of them accomplished in her own right. They were here not just as guests, but as potential partners, to help rebuild a home that has felt empty since my wife's passing." He paused, his voice softer now. "But in that time, I also learned that kindness, honesty, and love cannot be measured by wealth or beauty. They are measured by truth." The room grew still. Vanessa laughed lightly. "Well, we all tried our best, Ethan," she said, trying to sound charming. He turned toward her slowly. "Yes, you did," he said. "You all did. That's why I want to thank you, and show everyone exactly what you've done." The lights dimmed. The large screen behind him flickered to life. At first, there was confusion. Then the first video clip played. It showed Vanessa and Lydia whispering in the study at midnight, placing a small bag into the drawer. Gasps echoed through the hall. The camera shifted to another scene, showing Amber mocking Grace in the hallway, Charlotte spilling wine on the rug and blaming her, and all 5 women laughing as they insulted her. Grace stood frozen, her hands trembling. Tears filled her eyes as the crowd murmured in shock. Ethan's voice broke the silence. "These are the women who claim to care about me and my son," he said, his tone firm. "But this is what they did behind closed doors." Vanessa's face went pale. "That's not fair. You don't understand," she said quickly. "Oh, I understand perfectly," Ethan replied. "You lied, you bullied my son, and you tried to destroy the one person who showed real kindness in this house." He turned toward the crowd. "This woman," he said, pointing to Grace, "did more for my family in 4 months than anyone else did in years. She never asked for anything, she never complained, and she loved my son when he needed it most." Everyone turned toward Grace. She stood frozen, tears streaming down her face. Ethan's voice softened. "When my wife passed away, I thought love was gone forever. I was wrong. It was right here, sweeping floors, cooking meals, and comforting a lonely child." He stepped down from the stage and walked to where she stood. The cameras followed every move. He took her hand gently. "Grace Miller, I owe you an apology, and something more." The crowd watched silently. Noah ran forward and hugged Grace tightly, his little voice trembling. "I told you they'd know the truth," he said. Ethan smiled faintly and turned to the guests. "Noah," he said softly, "you've spent the last month with everyone here. Tell me, son, who took care of you the best?" Noah didn't hesitate. He looked up at his father, then pointed at Grace. "Miss Grace, because she loves me for real." A wave of emotion moved through the room. Guests clapped softly at first, then louder. Some of the women in the audience wiped tears from their eyes. Ethan knelt down in front of Grace. "You've been the heart of this house, the reason my son smiles again," he said quietly. And if you'll allow it, I want you to be more than that. I want you to be part of our family forever." Gasps filled the hall. Ethan pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it. "Grace Miller, will you marry me?" Grace covered her mouth, tears running freely. "I don't deserve this," she whispered. Ethan smiled gently. "You deserve everything good in this world." She nodded slowly, then said through tears, "Yes." The crowd erupted in applause. Noah cheered and hugged them both as camera flashes filled the room. The 5 women slipped out quietly, their heads bowed as murmurs of disapproval followed them. Their lies had destroyed their reputations. Months later, the Parker mansion no longer felt cold. Laughter returned, echoing through the halls. The garden bloomed brighter, and the small patch where Noah once gave Grace a paper crown now had roses planted around it. Grace walked hand in hand with Ethan, watching Noah play with his baby sister, Ella. The sunlight touched their faces softly. "I still can't believe this is real," Grace whispered. Ethan smiled. "It's real because we built it together." She looked up at him. "I would go through all of it again if it led me here." He kissed her forehead gently. "And I would spend a lifetime proving that love isn't about status, it's about the heart that stays when everyone else leaves." Noah ran up to them, laughing. "Come on, Mom, Dad, look at Ella, she's trying to walk." Grace lifted the baby and smiled. "One small step at a time," she said softly. Ethan wrapped his arm around her, looking out at the garden. "That's how everything begins," he said. As the wind moved through the flowers, the family stood together, proof that love built on truth can never be broken. Dear viewers, this story reminds us that money can buy comfort, but it can never buy kindness. The poor maid that everyone laughed at turned out to be the only one with a real heart. She didn't fight with words, she fought with patience, with truth, and with love. Ethan thought he was searching for a wife, but in the end, it was his son who showed him what real love looks like. Sometimes, the people the world looks down on are the very ones sent to heal our hearts. If this story touched you, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who believes love is more than status, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps us tell more stories that bring hope, healing, and faith back into people's hearts. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe to Black American Stories so you don't miss the next emotional story we release. Every click, every comment, every share helps us spread more love and truth to the world. Remember, real love isn't found in wealth or beauty, it's found in a heart that stays honest, no matter the storm. Thank you for watching. And may you always choose love over pride, just like Noah chose grace.